Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
There are three perfectly timed triggers for this week's national interest. First, the easy virality of a social media post somebody wrote mixing up India's GDP and the wealth as determined mostly by market capitalization of its billionaires and talking about how it exposes the stark inequalities in our society, that how overall our per capita incomes are much lower than the averages of about $2,800 on nominal basis. Some really smart people fell for it. All good people, after all, have their hearts in the right place. India's inequalities are deep, wide, and in many ways getting worse. So what is the argument? It is just that the GDP is the sum of all national income, whereas wealth is what you've saved up and built over your past incomes, the market value or capitalization of your equity investments, holdings, your land, real estate, your jewelry, paintings, whatever. Wealth is not income. Wealth is not income, and similarly, income is not wealth. Indian market's total capitalization now is closing in on about $6 trillion. The economy is a little over 3.6 trillion. So you can see that it's way more than the country's GDP. Ambani, Adani, Birla, Tata, Jindal, Mittals, all the billionaires you can count will draw their wealth mostly from it, that is the market capitalization equivalent. Most of the rest of us, 1.42 billion Indians, will draw a humble share of this GDP. How could a mythology like this, however romantic, find such currency 33 years after the 1991 reforms? This gives us the first trigger that old povertarian instincts are back, assailing the hearts and minds of the smartest. The second is the steel industry doubling up on lobbying for even more duties on imports, making India's steel among the most expensive anywhere in terms of domestic prices. The price is paid by the domestic user, you and I, who build homes and buy automobiles. It's passed on to the gig worker's scooty, the farmer's tractor or plow, the kadhai, the humble chamcha, spoon in your kitchen, all of it. All the stuff that steel goes into. This when MSMEs are crying about steel prices driving them to bankruptcy, and when the bigger boys, the automakers, whisper to you looking left and right to make sure nobody is watching about the imported containers, imported steel containers sitting in our ports forever awaiting clearance. The issue isn't just the price that they are importing this because it's cheaper, because there are duties. So the issue isn't just the price. About 20% of the steel needed by the auto industry is the kind not yet made in India. The government, however, doesn't care, having gone full protectionist. Surjit Bhalla and Karan Bhasin highlight some of it in their Cry de Coeur, Cry from the Heart. In the Indian Express, the article is headlined, Dreams of Viksit Bharat Stumble Over Nehruvian Impulses. You will see it on your screen. I'm also sharing a link with you. This article shows how the old defenders of economic reform, the stoutest defenders of economic reform, in fact, P. Chidambaram once said to me that your columnist Surjit Bhalla, Indian Express columnist, he said your columnist Surjit Bhalla sits way to the right of Adam Smith. So this is Surjit Bhalla writing, and this article shows how the old defenders of economic reform and also supporters of Narendra Modi government and who had great expectations from it are also hurting now. This year's GDP growth has already been cut by the RBI to 6.6%. Usually the RBI is bullish and overestimates the growth numbers. They are not conservative on growth numbers. Our FDI has more than halved from $56 billion in 2019-20 to $26.8 billion in 2023-24 and trending towards just about that much at best this year. trade is stalled. Earlier this week, I had the honor of being invited to speak at the annual event of the Forum of Free Enterprises, FFE, in Mumbai. The FFE was set up in July 1956 by Arvind Shroff, or usually known as AD Shroff, as an intellectual and philosophical counter to Jawaharlal Nehru's hard drive to the left with the Congress Party's industrial policy resolution that April. So within 3 months, he responded to that by founding the Forum of Free Enterprise as a counter. That industrial policy resolution of the Congress Party strangled Indian industry and entrepreneurship for 3.5 decades until P.V. Narasimha Rao broke the shackles in 1991. This policy divided Indian industry into 3 categories, A, B and C. The first, the commanding heights, which actually included almost everything of consequence. Those belonged entirely to the government, which means the PSUs. Category B could have the private sector in some areas where it already existed, but all new enterprises in these areas were now to be set up by the state. But if you already had a steel plant, as Tata's did, you could continue on with it, but all new steel plants will now henceforth be set by the government. So in B category were those industries in which private sector was already involved and you could carry on, but the new industry will all come from the government. I am re-emphasizing that. And C category was open, but only with licensing and fixing of quotas by the Sarkar, by the government. It had much sex appeal, it seems. That's why the Congress continued to be re-elected in spite of the so-called Hindu rate of growth. Indira Gandhi completed her father's socialist push with mass nationalizations between 1969 and 1973. These included New India Assurance Company and Bank of India, both of which Shroff had helmed. AD Shroff had helmed. AD Shroff had been on the 8-member group of eminent Indians who drew up the Bombay Plan for India's economy in 1944. He was also a non-official member at the first Bretton Woods gathering. That's where World Bank, IMF, etc. were set up. He and the Bombay Plan lost the philosophical battle for the direction of India's post-independence economy. He lost it to the political power of the day. The fighter and free spirit in him, however, responded by building the FFE, an institution that would teach Indians the virtues of unfettered entrepreneurship and evils of government controls. You can read more about him in an excellent biography written by Sucheta Dalal. Here is the irony. His institution fought Mrs. Gandhi's socialist surge at her peak. Its supporters included Nani Palkiwala and Meenu Masani of the Swatantra Party. Read his prescient interventions in the Rajya Sabha debate on bank nationalization. H.T. Parekh, former CMD of ICICI and later founder of HDFC. He became a backer too. The emergency did not deter Shroff or any of his partners. There is in fact a personal story in this. In January 1976, almost 49 years ago, at the peak of Mrs. Gandhi's emergency power, I was a journalism student. As part of my curriculum, I was interning for 6 weeks at the Times of India newsroom in Delhi, just next door from where I sit now in the Express building. I would come dutifully every morning, walking from my favorite aunt's place in Old Delhi's Bazaar Sitaram, and sit all day waiting for work. The chief reporter, the late B.K. Joshi, would give me none. He won't even look at me. Once I gathered the courage to ask him why. He said, "You graduated in science and with very good marks. I don't want you wasted in journalism. Go back, enroll in your university's chemical engineering department, and once you graduate, come to me. I will help you get a license to set up a factory to make paints or tires." He said he just couldn't see a bright young fellow ruined on journalism. This was peak emergency. No freedom, no news, no jobs, and full censorship. Because I was persistent, one day his face twisted in that fed up, "You are so self-destructive" smirk. He bent and fished out an invite from his trash basket, जिसको रद्दी की टोकरी बोलते हैं हिंदी में. "Go cover this," he said, "and don't think we'll publish it. Just go cover this because you want some work." It was to get me off his back. I took a bus ride to the YMCA on New Delhi's Jai Singh Road, where M.R. Pai, then Secretary of FFE, later Vice President, secretary of FFE, was delivering a message on free markets, just delivering a class like a tutorial, and eviscerating Mrs. Gandhi's license quota Raj and Mai Baap Sarkar. At the peak of the emergency, he was also distributing little booklets, each discussing such specific issues in great detail. There was a register for you to enter your mailing address if you wanted to keep receiving this. I filled mine there. How my own view on the economy, or more specifically political economy, evolved subsequently is owed to that encounter with FFE in no small measure. It is possible that the 1991 reform took the energy out of FFE, or maybe even the raison d'etre, as if with the philosophical victory that cause had been achieved. The forum does live on, with eminent lawyer and tax expert H.P. Ranina as its president, but it's no longer an intellectual powerhouse that will reach out to people young and old in all parts of the country in many languages to counter the relentless return of bad old ideas. Import substitution, government-mandated incentives, PLI for example, retrospective taxation, protectionism, the return of the big state, goodbye to privatization, all bad ideas, all marking the return of the Mai Baap Sarkar in Indian business and entrepreneurship. For those who might say it's too risky to speak up now given how powerful the establishment is, remember AD Shroff took on Nehru even on his central argument. Capitalism, Nehru said, was bad for democracy and political freedoms. Shroff said it was the opposite, that it's Nehru's kind of socialism that came loaded with that venom, and further that economic and political freedoms came together. In fact, at one point, Nehru did reach out to him through his commerce minister then, M.R. Shah, who said that, look, if you do this, consequences will be bad. And I read it on AD Shroff's profile on the FFE website that he responded to then commerce minister by raising his hands, showing him his palms and saying, look, my hands are clean. What is it that you can do to me? What harm can you do to me? That is how the reformers fought the greatest assault on India's free economy in the 1950s onwards. India's economic reforms lost steam, is sliding backwards in some areas, and an institution like the Forum of Free Enterprise is missing just when it's needed most. To protect our hard-won economic freedoms of 1991 from being lost again. Now you can see why this was the third and the most troubling of these triggers.